Greetings and salutations, friends. Welcome to another Sunday sermon. I am your host, Reverend Riff. Thank you so much for being here. I greatly appreciate your time and effort to tune in each Sunday. And just generally grateful for the little bit of time we get to hang out on Sunday mornings and talk about some interesting stuff. I hope everybody has had a good week. I hope it has treated you well. Hope you didn't have to work too hard. And if you did, I hope you got something out of it. So, this week, we are kind of doing an, I don't even know how to say this, kind of a background story. And I feel like it's going to add some context to the next 2 weeks. Because the next 2 weeks, after this week, we're going to do our 2 week deep dive into the book of Revelation, which is just so crazy and so insane, yet also something that a lot of people at least feel like they have some semblance of familiarity with because they've heard about it before. They know something about that book. And a lot of what they know, unfortunately, is kind of fanfic misconceptions. They don't tend to know the actual story of that book, if you can really sum that book up into an actual story. There's a whole lot of chaotic stuff going on in there that could be interpreted and has been interpreted. I shouldn't just say could be, it has been interpreted in about a million different ways. And I think we should just talk about some of those ways and, get to kind of try to come to a consensus as to what we think about them and just more or less kind of talk about them and try to find a common ground that we can feel good about understanding that book. I don't think anybody really can understand that book because I don't think it's meant to be understood. I generally kind of tend to think a crazy person wrote it. And when you spend time trying to understand what crazy people think, you just make yourself crazy. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking your time to hang out with me on a Sunday morning. And so, how are we going to give context to next week? Well, everybody in just about every Christian circle I've ever been in, been outside of, known anything about, Satan is the big bad, right? And so the book of Revelation is when Satan gets his. But first, he causes a whole lot of problems for everybody on Earth, and it's a whole big thing. Well, the idea that that's all Satan's fault, I'm here to challenge that a little bit. Because I don't necessarily think that's true. Is nothing really to support it. Satan's getting a bum rap, is what I'm trying to say here, folks. Satan's getting a bum rap. So, how can we, know who's the real Satan? Why would we want to know the real Satan? I can hear you. Well, because generally speaking, most of recorded history, he wasn't really the bad guy. He was a guy who, according to most belief structures, was created for a specific purpose. Today we're sponsored by Orange Gatorade, because we're not, but, it's fun to pretend. And he was a guy who was created for a very specific purpose. And he did that purpose. And if you believe that God creates people for a purpose, and that everyone has a purpose, and that it is your job to do your purpose, then he's just doing his job as his creator intended, and catching a whole lot of shit for it. And I would like to point out, too, that this isn't like a Judas thing. I know some people will claim that, hey, Judas had to betray Jesus, so Jesus was counting on him. So in the end, he actually did what Jesus wanted, even though he, was a betrayer and a deceiver and all that stuff, and he sold out his buddy. People are like, oh, well, he had to. This isn't even that kind of thing. Because, see, Judas still did something devious. He betrayed his friend. He sold his friend out for money. He sold his teacher out for money. And so, this isn't that. This is just, it's not selling anybody out. It's not lying or doing anything devious. It's just doing your job. And so, I think, we could have a little sympathy for the devil there. So let's get into this, shall we? Let's get our handy dandy aid here. So, we've got our aid, and it's talking about there's something about Satan, which another way to look at that would be you keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. Credit Inigo Montoya. What do I mean there? I mean that Satan is a very specific word. It means something specific. And when we go throwing all of this negativity the devil's way and blaming the devil for this, that, and the other and everything that we want to accuse him of, yeah, Satan isn't the right word for that. Because it really, I don't know, that guy doesn't fit with who I think about. So the devil is in the details. Let's talk about a little bit of the backstory of the devil and where he really gets introduced as this opponent of humanity, shall we say. Because, I mean, that's how you're going to look at it, right? The devil, God loves us, the devil hates us, eternal struggle. That's the narrative we've all been fed since we were little kids. The devil is the one who tries to get you to do bad things so that you have to go to hell with him instead of going to heaven with Jesus. It's an epic struggle. Is it? No. The Torah. You know, first 5 books of the Bible, the book of the law. Yeah, they were no devil. No devil in any of those. All responsibility for evil is placed squarely on the shoulders of humanity. This could be seen as a giant point of difference between the Jews and their neighbors. What do I mean there? Because, as we've talked about many times, huge parts of Judaism were about differentiating itself from the other religions. They would crib other religious kind of practices and styles and themes, but they would kind of put a twist on them to make them 100% theirs, because that was a big thing about the Hebrew religion, was showing that you were different than everybody else. So, yeah, most other religions, gods tended to embody human characteristics. They were jealous, they were lustful, they were prideful, they got real angry over dumb shit. That was there weren't really devils and demons per se. They didn't think of those the way that we think of them. Instead, most of them were they were the gods, and sometimes they did cool shit, and sometimes they fucked your shit up, and never the twain shall meet. Like, you know, they just did what they wanted to do, and so evil was it wasn't as much evil as just the gods were doing what they wanted to do, and sometimes that shit all over humans, and sometimes it helped humans out. There wasn't some specific deity whose entire job was to create chaos. That was not how that worked. So, with the Israelites, they differentiated, but their God was perfect. Their God didn't make mistakes. Their God didn't do anything wrong. He didn't get, lustful and come down and impregnate a bunch of people like Zeus would, or get upset with a woman's beauty and get jealous like, Aphrodite or Hera would. He didn't do that. But they still needed a way to explain why bad shit happened. So they put that responsibility on people. Whenever you didn't listen to God, bad shit happened to you. That was called retributive justice, and it was a cornerstone of Torahic belief that good things happen to people because they're good, bad things happen to people because they're bad. If something bad happens to you and everybody thinks you're outwardly good, well, it must be because you're bad on the sly, and God knows. That was basically their kind of way of rolling. So, everything was humanity's fault, except for in the book of Isaiah, God says, the prophet Isaiah said, God said this: I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. So in the book of Isaiah, he's kind of giving God credit for evil. That God is the one who does this, and that God allows it to happen at bare minimum. He says right there, he creates evil. That is an interesting concept that, was fairly new. Now the prophet Isaiah, he came in around the 8th century. We'll talk a little more about him later. But this is a different concept here than any. This is more kind of in line with other religions, which is different from the Hebrews. That initially, if you read the Torah, everything's our fault, except for you get to Isaiah, and he's saying, no, 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 God did this. So, a little interesting dichotomy where the book kind of doesn't agree with itself. There's a lot of that. First appearance of Satan. The Book of Job, written around 600 BCE. We don't know real specifically, like we don't have a definite year, but it's in that ballpark. Could go a little way either side, likely skewing towards newer, like say 590, 570, maybe 580, somewhere in there. There's a character in there named Satan. In Hebrew, he would have been called Hasatan. And his name means opposer or adversary, but not to God. That is the misconception here. He does not oppose God, but he opposes humanity. Think of him as heaven's DA. He is the chief accuser up there in heaven. It is his job to weigh humanity's virtues and say, these people are good, you should bless them, God. These people suck, you should punish the shit out of them. And that was his gig. That was his job, was to accuse humanity, to oppose humanity, to be an adversary to humanity, to put trials and tribulations in their ways and see if when things started going rough, would they stick with God or would they curse him and say, hey, all this bad shit happened to me, you must not be as powerful as I thought you were. That is literally what the guy's job is. He is basically described as an angel who works for God as the DA. Think God's the judge, Satan's the DA. Meanwhile, that 600 BCE date is very important because at the same time in history, there was a guy named Zoroaster. You've heard of Zoroastrianism? That's the guy. He was a religious philosopher, lived right around that same time that the Book of Job gets written. He popularized the idea of dualism. It had existed before him, but was not really a real fleshed out concept. The idea that everything exists in balance, and that if something is one way, there has to be an opposite thing of it to balance it. And he felt the same way about God, that God was perfect and everything that is good came from God. Well, so where all the bad things come from? Well, they come from the opposite of God, this evil, malevolent force that creates all the bad things in the world. Kurt Cummings, welcome to the party. Raise hell and praise Dale. Oh, welcome, Kurt. So yeah, Zoroaster was the first guy to really popularize the idea that God has to have an opponent. In his world, everything needs to have balance. So he didn't want to make God a good guy and a bad guy. No, in his world, God is the good guy. Well, a good guy needs a bad guy to oppose in Zoroaster's worldview. So he he popularized this idea of dualism. Now, why is that important? Well, because his teachings eventually became the state cult of the Persian Empire. Why is that important? Oh, because of the dates. Look at those dates. We all know that, we've talked about this before, it was around 587 that the Emperor Nero, I'm mixing up my dynasties. The Babylonians came in, smashed Israel, destroyed the temple, looted it, took the Israelites out of the Promised Land. And in 570, the Persians crushed the Babylonians, and so now the Jews, default, were owned by the Persians. So these ideas are kind of melding right at the perfect time. Remember when we talked about the book of Daniel and the lion's den and the fiery furnace, and that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not bend the knee to the religion of the king? Yeah, that was the Babylonians. Right after that, the Babylonians got smashed by these guys, the Persians, who bring in Zoroastrianism, and a lot of Christianity pulls from that. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. So there you go. The Babylonians conquered Israel 587. They in turn were conquered by the Persians in 550. So, and then many other aspects of the Hebrew faith, they were cribbed from that. So, I think it's important that we talk about the backstory here, because the backstory is really important before we go on. So give me just a moment. So, now, what's happened? The Persians are in control of all of the Jews. The Persians try to be fairly decent about this, and they're like, they grant the Jews a pretty solid amount of autonomy. They don't, they didn't conquer these guys. These guys weren't their enemies. They just kind of inherited them when they conquered their actual enemies, the Babylonians. So, the story of Haman, I'm sure we've all heard that. We've got to have a Jewish friend, and we know Purim. If we don't, I guess I'll have to explain that all to you. But long story short, there was a guy in the Persians. He was a dickhead. They got rid of him. Overall, Persian-Jewish relations are pretty decent. And the Persians basically get to the point where they want to let the Jews go back to Israel. They don't want to deal with them anymore. The Jews are just one more headache for the Persian Empire. They would rather let them go back to their homeland, establish, a kind of Vichy government, if you will, and just let them pay tribute to Persia. That would just be easier. That would be way easier. Plenty of Paul Heyman stories. Yeah, it actually lines up well when you think about it, because Heyman definitely thought he was the smartest guy in the room, and now we eat cookies about his mutilated corpse. Fun times. And so yeah, that was the goal: is let these Jews go back, let them kind of self-govern, and as long as they don't get uppity and they keep paying their taxes to us, why should we have to fucking deal with these guys? That was the general thought. But the Persians also knew what they could not afford was to have the Jews infighting amongst themselves about who was their king, and because then they're not going to be productive. They're not going to produce the taxes that the Persians need, and God forbid somebody might start a revolution. Then the Persians would have to come in and crush it. And again, that's just effort that nobody really feels like expending right now. So the Persians basically strike up a deal with the Jews. Tell them, you need to come up with an agreed upon backstory. You need a written down, this is our history, and that history needs to basically point to a lineage. And you need to pick a family, they need to be the kings, and you need to be able to back up why they're the kings from your history. That way, nobody will challenge it, everybody will go with it, they'll feel like it's divinely inspired, and you'll have peace in your kingdom, which means you'll run efficiently and you can pay us lots of tax money. We'll leave you alone. This is the deal that was made. This is why the books of Moses are written. Don't let anybody try to fool you. People will try to tell you Moses wrote those books. Moses did not write those fucking books. Simple reason why Moses didn't write those fucking books. The book of Deuteronomy talks about Moses' funeral. Now, Moses was an amazing guy, but I don't think he wrote about his own funeral. That would be a level of impressive that I can't get to. Yet, most people just take at face value that Moses wrote those books. Those books were likely written almost 1,000 years after Moses was dead. At least hundreds of years after Moses was dead. They were definitely written... They were definitely written based on, stories that have been told and passed down through generations. I'm not trying to dispute their recollection of a lot of the details. What I'm saying is that the details were intentionally focused to point to a specific thing. Dale has that ability. And what they were pointing to was that the Davidic line had to be the king. Remember, in your Bible history, David and Solomon have already passed. This is now... We're getting towards the end of the Old Testament when the Persians allow them to go back and rebuild the temple with Nehemiah, those cats. Well, that's where you can't find any historical record, really, of David and Solomon, because they didn't freaking exist. They were fanfic to give the Israeli people a national sense of pride and tell them, oh, way back in the day before you all were born, we actually ran shit over here. We were a great, powerful people, but we didn't listen to God, so he allowed us to get destroyed. But now we're back, but we really got to listen to God. And then the Persians just made sure that listening to God lined up with their interests, and so that they now had a puppet government. That's why the Old Testament was written. Don't let people tell you other things than that. It's nonsense. So, let's move along now, shall we? The book of Job. So, I don't know how much you guys know of Job, so I will give you the Cliff's Notes version of Job real quick. So, Job is balling. Job's balling hard. Job is rich. Job is happy. Job lives a great life. Job is also a very upstanding dude, and God really digs Job. At one point, Hasatan, or our buddy Satan, comes to God and goes, you know, Job's only super awesome because you give him everything. And God goes, explain. Satan says, you have marked him to be protected. Bad shit doesn't happen to him. I'm not allowed to fuck with him and put obstacles in his way. And if I was, you'd see this dude would curse you. This dude would turn on you quick. This dude only loves you because he is just filthy fucking rich, has a beautiful, loving family. Life's crazy. Why wouldn't he love you? You've given him everything. Yeah. So then God goes, nah, Job loves me because loving me is the right thing to do. And he goes, he'd love me. And Satan goes, bet you he wouldn't. And so God goes, okay, you can take everything you want from him, but you can't touch him. So then Job gets a series of bad news. Job finds out that raiders have come and stolen all of his livestock, which is the principal, area of his wealth. He says, hey, what are you going to do? Bad things happen. Then he loses his land, his properties. And he's like, okay, still okay. Then he finds out that the building that all of his lovely children were in collapsed on top of them and killed them all. Job did not fly to space on a dick rocket. He is a little bit cooler than Bezos. Just a little bit. No, wait till we get to the end of the Job story, because this is one of the things I found out. The Job story ending is not as clean cut as you've been taught, I assure you. So, now Job's kids are dead. He's depressed beyond measure, and he starts to question a little bit. He's like, I'm broke, now my family is gone, but God, you got to have a plan here. You got to have a plan here. He still doesn't curse God. Satan comes back to God, goes, well, yeah, Job's still got his health. He's still not miserable. God goes, all right, you can put your hands on him, but you can't kill him. Satan goes, all right, gotcha. He afflicts Job with these horrible boils and lesions all over his body. Job is miserable. Job's wife comes and just says, why don't you just curse God? You know God did this to you. Why don't you just curse God? Job says, bitch, that's not what I'm about. And so then Job goes out and he does the traditional act of mourning. He puts himself in sackcloth and ashes, and he sits at basically the garbage dump to the city, and his friends come, his 3 boys come. Job begins to openly question God and saying, I didn't do anything fucking wrong. What is the deal here? Why am I getting shit on so greatly? His friends, they don't really act like much like friends. They basically tell him, so why don't you just admit what you did, Job? You had to have done something. God doesn't treat people like this. This is the first debate about theodicy that we ever know in human history. The first recorded debate of it right here is this passage. His friends state, retributive justice. That's what they believe. That bad things only happen to people if they deserve them. So clearly Job did something that he's not telling them about. Maybe even that he doesn't realize he did, but Job had to have done something, because God doesn't punish you for no reason. Job argues that he has done nothing wrong and that this is all a big load of bullshit. Elihu, who is a prophet, comes and says that both of you are wrong. He says that God is the only one who can understand what God does. He rebukes Job's 3 friends, saying, if Job had done something wrong, it wouldn't have been any of your fucking business. That's between him and God. You 3 assholes are not helping. But Job, it is not your place to question God, because if God wants to take a big steamy dump on you, That's God's business. And then he kind of exits stage right. Now, the ending that is taught to just about everybody that's ever read this story is that Job cries out to God and asks God why. Why did you do all this to me? And God comes back and gives him a little bit of shit. Job says, God, this is bullshit. Fuck you. Why did you do this to me? This sucks. He cries out. God does not take that well. Job basically throws it back at God that I've been your loyal servant. I've done everything right. And thou hast shat on me mightily. God's response is he's fucking annoyed at even answering the question. He says, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you will make it known to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Yeah. God hit Job with the stone cold stunner there. He said, listen, dickhead, I built the universe. Did you ever think that maybe there's more going on here than you can understand? Now, what I love about this, God never tells Job about the bet. The reader of the story understands that what's going on. Job is never given any kind of insight into why the fuck this is happening to him. He's just told to deal with it. And that's like a lot, I feel like. Like, again, we always read this story from our point of view, knowing that this is all part of this big bet between God and Satan. Job has no clue about that. As far as Job's concerned, God is actively doing all this to him. So, that's important to keep in mind. And so God doesn't explain anything. God tells Job to fuck himself, as you can see here. But then, also not explaining anything, God gives Job double everything he lost. Like, almost instantly, Job becomes twice as wealthy as he was before. He has 10 kids, 7 boys, and 3 daughters who are listed as being the most beautiful women in all of the country that he lives. His health comes back. And we're just supposed to ignore the fact that they doesn't bring Job's dead kids back to life. So they're just collateral damage in God's little game with Satan here. They're just collateral damage in this whole fucking thing. But what's interesting, and I had never heard this before, but I think it's very interesting to point out, apparently, the Hebrew at the end of Job is very difficult to dissect and translate. And there are many scholars who actually believe that Job does not apologize for calling God out. That Job actually says that he wishes he hadn't repented at all, or like done the whole humiliating himself where he rips his clothes and he covers himself in ashes. Job basically says, I wish I hadn't done that because I never did anything wrong, so go fuck yourself. That's actually a pretty baller ending that he tells God to piss off, and God goes, yeah, you're kind of right, I was being a dick. Here's double everything I took from you. Sorry about that. Not the whole Job grovels to God and says, I understand why you shit all over me because that's your prerogative. And God goes, oh, you get it, and gives him everything back. Very different understanding. But what I love about the story that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense from a narrative standpoint is the whole story seemed to be throwing retributive justice to the wind, stating that the will of God was the will of God and that we weren't ever going to understand it. And sometimes bad things just happen to good people, theodicy, and that we just have to deal with it because God knows what he's doing. Yet at the end of the book, it seems like God backs off and goes back to the whole retributive justice thing, and because Job persevered and endured, he ends up with double what he had before all this nonsense started. So it's a lot of mixed messages from that book that don't really make a whole hell of a lot of sense. But that is the first appearance of Satan. And again, He was the DA in that. He's not really the bad guy. He's the one that says, "Hey God, Job would turn his back on you." Now, if we are willing to believe that God is omniscient, as is taught, then God already knew that Job wouldn't turn his back on him. So if he already knew that, why did he need to make the guy suffer for his little game? That's a great question. Whoops. So, now let's talk about some of the guys that formed our thought of Satan. Let me talk to you about Satan for a minute here. So at this point, Satan is just that. He's the DA. Nobody thinks anything more or less of him. That is what he is. He is the DA of heaven. He doesn't even have all those crazy names. You know, Lucifer, Beelzebub, Prince of Darkness, the Prince of Lies, all those names. He doesn't have all those names. He's just Hasatan. He's just trying to feed his wife and kids. So the prophet Isaiah is the one who gave Satan the name Lucifer. And it's also where you've all heard that Lucifer was this beautiful angel. He was the angel of light. And he was, really important in heaven. And he rebelled against God. That's not really in the Bible. There are some metaphors to some other people that Christianity conveniently over the years attributed to the devil because it served their purpose. He was the only angel with an OnlyFans. That was him. So, let's take a look at what our boy Isaiah was talking about. He's an 8th century prophet who wrote at least some of the book of Isaiah. He didn't write the whole book. Very possibly not. We don't even know if it was necessarily written in his lifetime. Many of his prophecies are claimed to foretell the coming of Cyrus the Great and his decision to allow the Jews to return to the Holy Land. That is a big thing with him. Timeline-wise, 8th century is, before the Babylonian conquest. But he prophesied that it would happen, and then another conquest would happen, and that conqueror would allow the Jews to go back home. The passage where he mentions Lucifer and introduces that name to the world. How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. Of course, Sheol is where dead people went in the Old Testament belief system. There wasn't a heaven and hell yet. There was just Sheol. That was just where you went when you died. And then if you were a good person, you would eventually be reabsorbed kind of into God. If you were a bad person, you stayed in Sheol. And the torment wasn't that they tormented you there per se. The torment was being in Sheol meant you were absent from the presence of God. And that was torment. That was the idea. No flames, no demons with pitchforks, none of that's going on. But this Lucifer that he's mentioning out, the morning star, he's not talking about the devil. He's not talking about the adversary in heaven who's opposing humanity. Who he's fucking talking about is the king of Babylon. And he's talking about how you had the whole world by the balls, but you're a dick, and so you're going to get brought down by the Persians. He's not talking about fucking devil. Nothing here is referring to the devil. This is a metaphor. That is probably the thing about interpreting the Bible that drives me the most nuts with people, is that when there are clearly metaphors, they want to read them as literal because it seems more fantastic. And when there are clearly sections to be taken literally, they decide to make them metaphors because then it gets them out. They can do infinite number of mental gymnastics to try to not interpret things correctly. Lucifer isn't the devil. He's the king of Babylon. He's an asshole. Another guy that really kind of colored our Bible belief of who the devil is would be the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel prophesied of and lived to see the Babylonian conquest. He warned everybody it was going to happen, and when it happened, he did have a bit of an I told you so moment. He also foretold of the return and rebuilding of the temple, but he died in 570 BCE, so about 20 years before the return happened. But he was there passing out hope that, hey, we're going to get to go home. He describes a guy called the King of Tyre. We've all heard of Tyre and Sidon, famous cities. Tyre, the peninsula, the city that was an island that Alexander turned into a peninsula. Yeah, that Tyre. Well, back in the day, in Hebrew mythology, we don't know whether this was true because we generally believe that David and Solomon didn't even exist, but it was believed that the king of Tyre was an ally to them and that he had been a very good, strong ally. But somewhere along the line, the king of Tyre stopped supporting the Jews. And Ezekiel is basically placing some of the blame for their fall to the Babylonians on the hands of the king of Tyre. That had he stepped up and tried to help them out, maybe this wouldn't have happened. But he forsook them, and so now bad shit is going to happen. For some reason, well, I mean, I know the reason. He uses very colorful, fantastic language and basically blames all of the ills of the world on the king of Tyre. People have taken this and said that he wasn't talking about the king of Tyre. He was actually talking about Satan. He never says that. He never gives you any reason to believe he's talking about anyone but the king of Tyre. But the story he tells, John Milton, who wrote one of the greatest fan fictions of the Bible ever written, called Paradise Lost, really loved this idea and took what Ezekiel is about to say here and turned it into his rugged, good-looking anti-hero Satan, who was the guy who got shit on by everybody and, just wanted to be loved by God as much as God loved humans. And because God couldn't love him as much as he loved humans, he led a rebellion, and, he's very tragic. Most of that comes from Milton, not from the Bible. Milton took parts of these prophecies and turned them into something that worked better for his story. Mortal, raise a lamentation over the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you were the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, carnelian, crystalite, moonstone, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, turquoise, emerald, and worked in gold were your settings and your engravings. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. With an anointed cherub as guardian, I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked among the stones of fire. You were blameless in your ways from the day that you were created until iniquity was found in you. In the abundance of your trade you were filled with violence, and you sinned. So I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God, and the guardian cherub drove you out among the stones of fire. Your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I exposed you before kings to feast their eyes on you. But the multitudes of iniquities, in the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. So I brought out fire from within you. It consumed you, and I turned you to the ashes on the earth in the sight of all who saw you. All who know you among the peoples are appalled at you. You have come to a dreadful end, and shall be no more forever. That was a whole lot of shit. But you know what he never said there? Anything that would make you think he's specifically talking about the devil. He's talking about how great this person was and how you were perfect. He says things about your trade, was great. And I exposed you before other kings. What does that have to do with Satan? He's talking about the actual king of Tyre. And he's basically saying, you're going to get yours too because you didn't help us out. John Milton, though, thought this was really cool, decided to make it about Satan, and Paradise Lost was written. And with that, we get to the true evolution of the devil from what we know him as now, how he initially started out as an agent of heaven. He was on the good guys team. He just had a shitty job. And then, give us 1,000 years, and we've turned him into a royal dickhead. Not that guy's fault. Let's move on. Let's get into a little timeline here. This will help explain it, I think. It helps me understand it. From the start of the church in the Middle Ages, the devil was an agent of heaven. He served as the accuser against humanity. Now, this mosaic, we believe, is the earliest artistic impression of the devil. This comes from the 6th century, is in Ravenna, Italy. It is in a basilica there. Which one do you think is the devil? You see, there's a red guy and a blue guy, right? I'm going to give you a hint. It's not the red guy. That's right, the devil is the blue guy. The red one, that's Michael, the archangel. And as you see, he has sheep with him. The blue guy, the Prince of Peace. The blue guy there, that's the devil. That's our buddy Satan. He's got goats. Why? That's Jesus in the middle. He's wrapped in purple, purple being the color of royalty. And he's dividing his flock. The sheep, they are the righteous. They're his flock of sheep. They're going with Michael over there. The goats, the non-believers, they're headed over there with Satan to get what's coming to them. Why is Satan blue, Chad? I don't understand, Riff. Why is Satan blue? Let me tell you why Satan's blue. Satan, ever since the dawn of the church, which is why I wanted this episode to be after last week. You needed to understand the timeline of the church last week to understand the timeline of Satan this week. From the start of the church, one of their best tactics, one of their most impressive propaganda tactics, is taking other people's gods and associating them with demons and the devil to try to further their point that their religion is the only true religion and that any other religion is actually a form of Satan worship. Bes was a big deal in Egyptian mythology. Bes was a big deal god. Bes also happened to always be depicted as being blue-skinned. So naturally, the bad guy in this story, if you will, the less desirable guy, he gets the blue outfit because at this point, fire is considered cleansing and purifying, so the red fire goes on our homie Michael there. This is, again, 6th century. What do we know is going on? Well, the first few branches of the Catholic Church have broken away. But the Catholic Church still is maintaining the idea of this. The devil is this angel who works for God, and it's his job to take the sinners. Fast forward. We now get about 600 years later. We're in the Middle Ages. Satan is no longer the accuser. He's not the DA. He's now the punisher. And he has gotten significantly scarier looking. He is no longer depicted as a traditional angel, but as this warped beast who lives in hell and torments sinners. Hell is now a concept. Instead of just Sheol, no, we've got hell now. Hell is where you don't want to go. But again, Satan is still blue. He still reminds us of Bes. And now he started to take on some other religions. He kind of looks like Pan a little bit now. He's got the horns. They've put the snakes in his ears because we have now retconned the Bible and said that the devil was totally the snake in the garden. That's nowhere in the Bible. But these guys are like, nope, yep, definitely. But again, Satan is still not a bad guy. Even in this picture, even though he looks scary, he is still serving a function as an agent of heaven. He is down in hell punishing the sinners who turn their back on God. He does not wear Prada until the 20th century. It's really amazing that he held out that long. But yeah, so there's devil. This is from a mural that is in Italy as well. Surprise, surprise. Painted in 1260. It's a really cool mural. And there's a whole lot going on, but this is the important part. Satan is still, we're at 1260. Satan is still technically on the side of the good guys. He's doing God's work. Now we get to 1400. The Limbourg brothers from France, they really pushed the imagery of Satan as a king of hell. They constantly depicted him with crowns on. Satan became kind of a hairy beast under these guys' watch. They published a thing called the Book of Hours, which was basically their fanfic version of Christianity, but it had some dope illustrations in it. It became a sensation in France. The rich were dying to get their hands on a copy of this book. Everybody wanted to see these pictures that were in it of basically these macabre demon parties. This is the first time we really start to depict Satan as hell is his spot. It's not this place where he goes to work. He likes it there. That is his joint. And he wants to bring as many people to hell as he can because he's not doing his job anymore tormenting people. He genuinely enjoys it. He and the demons get off on hurting people, causing them pain. And this is where we start to see the seeds planted of the idea that it is the devil who tempts you. It's not your own weakness that allows you to sin, that it's the devil trying to get you to sin so that he can drag you down into hell, so that he can put you on his giant pyre and, do all the fucked up shit to you that is going on in this picture. This is where the turn is happening. Now, what is also happening around 1400? Oh, we're really starting to see the cracks in the Catholic Church. The Reformation is starting to pick up steam. Our boy John Wycliffe is saying some shit about the Catholic Church. So why would you do this? Oh, I don't know. Maybe because now, if you depict the devil as his own team, he's not on Team Heaven anymore. He's on his own team. Then it would be really easy to depict anybody else who's not on Team Heaven, who's not going with what the church wants, as being on Team Satan. And everybody knows being on Team Satan is bad. By the 16th century, Satan got witches. He never had witches before, but now he's got witches. And as before, it's not based on any actual text. Instead, it's just superstition, fan fiction, and the overwhelming misogyny of the Catholic Church. Remember, the Catholic Church has said that only men can be priests. The world as a whole is pretty fucking misogynistic. But yet, women had traditionally occupied roles of healers, of seers, of, soothsayers, medicinal women, midwives, all of these things that were linked to a dirty little word to the Catholic Church: science. These women all knew how to do things to help people that didn't involve giving money to the Catholic Church or praying. The Catholic Church had to stamp that shit out quick. They could not have people not relying on them for every single thing they needed. They didn't give a fuck if your baby died at birth. They were not pro-life like they like to pretend they are. They would rather your baby die than you have a midwife come help you with that birth, because she might give you a concoction of some herbs or something to help with the pain, and that was witchcraft. Why was it witchcraft? Because you didn't buy it from the fucking church. If she had balls and made that balm in a monastery, they would sell it, and it would be fine. So it's a fucking racket, and if you think it's not, you're stupid. So Satan is now the father of all evil at this point. He has, by the 16th century, and as it goes forward, now Satan is more the Satan that we know. He hangs out with witches. He looks like the god Pan, because, again, fuck the Greeks was basically what they were going for at this point. Again, also, Catholic Church, wherein the Great Schism has happened at this point. The West and the East need to differentiate, so the West really leans in hard that any type of mysticism or anything, things that were more popular in the East, were definitely Satan's purview, and you need to stay away from them. This lovely painting is also, of course, called Dreams of a Witch's Sabbath by Francisco Goya. He's one of my favorite painters. You should look at everything he ever painted. It's awesome. By the mid-19th century, Satan has begun to take on the cartoonist image that we all know now. Color red had become associated with the heat of hellfire, but as you notice, he looks a little less menacing here. And a lot of people have suggested that this was, as you know, even up until the 19th and 20th century, the number one patron of the arts was the church. If you were an artist and you wanted to get paid, you needed to draw pictures that the church liked. And the church liked the big, scary devil. As we started to get away from that and artists began to be able to make money not having to run everything by the church and deal with the censorship of the church, Satan started to get a lot less scary and a lot more human. Now that's kind of, there's a duality to that. Some of them were like, yeah, because the real devil is man. And the idea of this big cartoonish devil seemed to be a little bit less realistic. So they started to make the devil more like us. And the devil, instead of becoming this big monster, more became this guy with the pitchfork and the horn, still, kind of mimicking some of the other classic tropes from other religions. And that he would just kind of whisper in your ear and lead you astray. The kind of the softer but still very evil devil. This is where he comes from. Some artists actually made him look more human because the whole point was that, we're the bad guys in this story. There's no mythological monster that's doing any of this. It's on us. And so they kind of trolled the church by making the devil more realistic. It also reflects a change in the church's tone, whereas the church began to realize that people stopped believing in the big, scary monster devil. They needed to change with the times and make him something that people in modern times could believe in and be afraid of. That's where he comes in. So basically, to kind of re-sum up our timeline, the devil is the church is the biggest proponent of where the devil has come. Not the Bible, not people's belief systems, the church. The church used the devil basically as a stand-in for science. Whenever there was something that the church couldn't explain, wanting to know that was heretical. And if you disagreed with the church, that was heretical. So if the church said something and it was just scientifically bullshit, well, if you claimed the church was wrong and you used science to prove it, they would just call that witchcraft. Why? Because that associated you with Satan, and if they associated with Satan, they could burn you at the stake to shut you up, and everybody had their back. I think it's also very important to point out timeline-wise, when Satan really begins to manifest himself not as just the Punisher, but as the guy who actually causes bad things to happen, there was a little thing going on in the world at that time called the fucking plague. The Black Plague was ravaging everyone. Just Europe, people were dropping like flies. The Catholic Church can't protect people. And people were starting to get real upset and ask questions about, I've done everything the church has asked me. Why is my family and my friends all dropping dead from this disease? I thought God only punished bad people. So what did the church do? Oh, no. God's not the one who brought the plague. That was Satan. Satan brought the plague. And he can hurt good people and bad. So totally just keep praying to us and let us help you fight off Satan. But don't blame any of this on God or the church, because it's not us, it's the devil. Again, the devil has always existed for the convenience of the church. He is the ultimate, pun intended, scapegoat. That is what the devil has served a purpose for the church for many, many years, and will continue to serve that purpose. So think about that. The next time somebody, the devil made me do it, yeah, that is entirely a work from the Catholic Church. So you can thank them for all the nonsense, all the dead witches, everybody, all the repression of free thought, all of that. That was all done in the name of the Catholic Church. If you really think about it, if the devil really is this guy, let's say that, the devil is the guy that wants you to know things. The devil wants you to ask questions. Let's say the devil was the guy in the Garden of Eden. What was his big crime? Asking Adam and Eve to learn things? Notice it was the tree of knowledge that they bit from. There is a metaphor there, people. The church is saying, you don't chase after knowledge and the answers to things you can't understand. God doesn't want you to know all that stuff. That is what the church is saying by saying that the snake was the devil, was that just listen to us, and no matter how stupid what we tell you is, no matter how ignorant what we tell you is, no matter how far from the truth we tell you is don't question it, don't search for the truth, otherwise you're being like the devil. The devil is the ultimate feminist in my mind. The devil is associated with all these witches and all these women and all this learning and healing that they did outside of the church, where the church didn't actually want to, they weren't worried about healing anybody. They just wanted your money, and they were worried about your immortal soul in the afterlife, whereas the devil and his witches were worried about science and healing and making your life better on this plane. The devil exemplifies free thought. The devil is the hero in this story. The devil is the one that wants you to think. He wants you to try to come up with new solutions to problems. The devil is not the bad guy here. The Catholic Church is the bad guy, and has been for well over 1,000 years. So thank you for joining me today. Go out and be like the devil. Ask questions. Question authority. Question justifications for things. Question the why in everything. Because anybody that doesn't want you to ask questions probably is trying to pull the wool over your eyes. If you don't like questions, it's probably because you don't have answers. So thank you for being here this week. It's been good. This is one of my favorite topics. Anybody wants to talk more about the devil? I love talking about the devil, especially the devil in art, because art really did define our understanding and concept of the devil. Again, most of our history people couldn't read. People didn't know the text. People didn't know that the pictures they saw weren't actually in the Bible. So if the church told you to paint this big crazy picture of the devil, you just assumed that shit was in there and it was canon. It's a pretty slick maneuver. That's why the church, I think, is failing so hard now, is as people become more enlightened and more educated, it gets harder to pull the wool over their eyes. And as I say that, I think about Donald Trump and realize there's still plenty of uneducated people that can easily have the wool pulled over their eyes. So be like Satan. Ask questions. Don't just bow to authority. And, treat women with respect. That's your takeaways for today. So thank you for being here. I greatly appreciate it. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. We will see you next week when we start talking about the end of the fucking world. Have a great day.